Thank you very much, Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The overall aim of my research was to investigate the electioneering and campaigning of all political parties in Ireland for the 1918 general election and the 1920 local elections across the entire island of Ireland. Incorporated into this was an exploration of the role of women as electioneers and candidates, and today that is what I'm going to talk to you about. The main parties or political movements that contested the 1918 general election were the Constitutional Nationalist Irish Parliamentary Party, the Separatist Nationalist Shin Fein, Unionist and Labour, as has already been mentioned this morning. Independent candidates also contested, and in Ulster Labour associations and Belfast Labour nominated candidates, but with only moderate success. The number of independents and Ulster Labour was low, so they will not form part of the analysis today, as they mainly challenged the larger parties whose competition overshadowed their efforts. In the closing years of the 19th century, those excluded from politics became eligible to stand for election and to vote. Propertied women had been entitled to be elected as poor law guardians in 1896, and in 1898 the Local Government Ireland Act provided a major step towards voting reform. This granted men over the age of 21 and women over the age of 30 the right to vote in local elections, with some property qualifications for women. Women could also stand for election to urban and rural district councils, but were disqualified from serving on borough and county councils until 1911. The 1884 and 1898 Reform Acts gave voting rights to the majority of adult males, substantially increasing the electorate. The Fourth Reform Act, a representation of the People Act, passed through the House of Commons on the 9th of June 1917 with an overwhelming majority of 385 for to 55 against, and the bill received the royal assent on the 6th of February 1918. This act increased the electorate substantially by granting the vote to all men over the age of 21 and removing practically all the property requirements. Servicemen who had turned 19 during service in the Great War could also vote. Franchise was also granted to women over the age of 30 years to vote and run as candidates in by-elections and general elections, but there were still some property restrictions. The Freeman's Journal highlighted that the women's vote is a new factor in the election campaign, and as it roughly represents from 40 to 50% of the electorate, it will exercise an enormous influence on the result of the elections. According to this newspaper, in the city of Dublin, out of a total electorate of 124,000, there were 49,350 women parliamentary voters, representing roughly about 2/5 or 39.7% of the electors. In the county of Dublin, out of a total electorate of 75,000 odd, there were 30,600 women voters, comprising 40.5% of the electorate. According to the Irish Independent, in Belfast alone, there were 85,000 in one of the Tipperary divisions, where women were half the total electorate. Figures from the Freeman's Journal of 26 November 1918 show the total numbers of electors and women electors in various city and county constituencies, and this gives some indication of the strength of their voting power. Now, that's very hard to read, I do realise that, so I'll just give you one or two figures from it. In Tipperary County, for example, the women voters were nearly 35%. The sample provided here is small, given that there were 80 contested constituencies, but is unlikely there were great variances for the rest of the country. Women, as I said, could also run as candidates, and according to the Irish Citizen in December 1918, public meetings on party candidate selection were proceeding apace. There was a call by suffragists to see large numbers of women elected, and questions as to how this was to be done. Some called for a women's party, while others and the majority saw women standing with their respective parties, be they loyalist or republican, conservative or revolutionary. There were debates about suitable candidates, calls went out for capable women to run as candidates, and judgments were formed by women themselves about fellow females. For instance, one woman wrote, "I for one dislike having a lady who bursts into tears in public thrust upon the women's movement as a representative woman. It is grossly unfair to would-be lawyers and others of the educated generation who desire to show the ability and discipline of men when doing men's work." The 1916 proclamation had addressed both Irish men and Irish women, and Comhairle reminded the Sinn Féin Standing Committee of this and used it as a basis for petitioning the party to run female candidates. The Standing Committee argued that selection resided with the Comhairle Counter and not with themselves, but these appeals indicate that there was no general consensus and opinions differed. In the end, women were not successful in fielding candidates, and despite Comhairle urgings for women candidates, only 2 ran in urban constituencies. As already mentioned, Constance Markievicz for the Dublin St Patrick's Division and Winifred Carney, who contested in Belfast Victoria Division. Formatting a system for selecting women candidates proved problematic for Unionists too. There was even confusion among women themselves. Women's Unionist associations existed in many constituencies in Ulster, and the president of the Ulster Women's Unionist Council offered two paths forward. The first called for a fusion of men and women in one association, and the other for separate associations united at the top in one joint executive. However, the Ulster Women's Unionist Council failed to initiate a definite programme for selecting and appointing women candidates. Instruction was given to every woman above the age of 30 to ensure she was placed on the register. They were also called to carry out vigorous and persistent propaganda work prior to the election, and advised that the greatest care should be taken to select as office bearers and members of the committee only those who are prepared wholeheartedly and enthusiastically to throw themselves into the work of the association. But there was no specific call to nominate women candidates or to solicit support for potential women candidates, but the move towards inclusivity was evident. Unionists in the three southern provinces, whether male or female, was never able to attain mass party status because local branches varied in strength. This was part of the reason why the proportional representation method of voting was introduced in 1920. Unionist support was limited to certain sections of the population described as being usually Protestant, Anglicised, propertied and aristocratic. It was from this small pool that candidates had to be selected and supported. Labour planned for but later withdrew from the 1918 election, but their candidate selection system and a preparatory strategy was devised, so they are worth exploring briefly. In preparation for the 1918 general election, P.T. Dáil, under the auspices of the National Executive of the Irish Trades Union Congress and Labour Party, issued a circular with a list of questions. Trade union councils were asked whether constituencies in the district should be contested, what the prospects for a local Labour representative was, and how women voters could be organised and associated with the Labour Party. Labour had nominated the female candidate Helena Maloney, but she refused to run even before the decision was taken not to contest the election. Labour decided to pull out of the 1918 election for a number of reasons. One difficulty was that political Labour remained an appendage of the trade unions, and as Michael Laffan points out, who you'll be hearing from later today, this was illustrated by the sequence of words in the movement's official title. It was not until 1919 that the words Labour Party featured before rather than after Trades Union Congress. Another was Sinn Féin's doctrinaire approach and the internal conflicting attitudes towards divergent nationalist approaches to self-government. Most importantly, widespread disorganisation, politically speaking, not with trade unions, also prompted an escape from the stresses of the general election. Labour ultimately capitulated to all the internal and external pressures, but they needed to publicise a viable explanation or excuse. Thomas Johnson explained that Labour perceived a difference between the election that was originally anticipated and the reality of the one they were facing into. They had intended to nominate candidates for a war election, but that the current peace election, because the Great War had ended, called for a demonstration of unity on the question of self-determination to allow voters cast in favour of Home Rule or Republic. The question then is, if women's vote mattered, did political parties solicit their votes, and did propaganda from past ideals and conflicts influence political propaganda? And I'll start with the latter first. Ireland, as far back as the 18th century, was described by Gaelic poets and writers as a woman. Mother Ireland, the poor old woman, the Seán van Vocht, Kathleen Ní Húlaháin, Dark Rosaleen and Éireann featured heavily in literature, poetry and propaganda into the 20th century. For nationalists and particularly separatist nationalists, Éireann personified Ireland in two contrasting modes: a tragic and troubled Éireann who awaited a saviour to free her from British oppression, or a belligerent and powerful Éireann with spear or sword or flag in hand. And I've just put up the Seachtain Gaeilge poster there to give you some idea of that kind of ideology. The late 1800s and early 1900s was a time of consumer consumption change, with department stores such as Arnott's and Cleary's being established in Dublin. Commercial interests began using the Irish peasant female to encourage the purchase of hygiene or luxury products among the working classes. The colleen or Irish peasant girl became an icon to create brand personality, where the message was that using soap or shampoo would lead to a purified working class cleansed of polluting labour. In the poster shown above there, Robert Brown, proprietor of McClinton's Soap Company at Dunamore, County Tyrone, really embraced the use of the peasant Irish female. Consumer purchase of colleen soap expanded hugely due to a widespread print advertising campaign, which also expressed Brown's opposition to Home Rule, but they increased profits substantially in 1909. Great War propaganda in Ireland portrayed Ireland as female to encourage enlistment across the political divides. And in the example poster here, the poster "Will You Answer the Call?", Ireland as female was in the foreground with long auburn hair and arm resting upon a harp. The clothing of the white dress and blue mantle was similar to that of Mary, the Mother of God, and the crown represented either Mary's role in the kingdom of heaven or Ireland's position within the empire. Through the strings of the harp, a bugle-playing gallant Irish soldier was visible, and the music notes at the top translated the opening bars of the last post, and the background image within the harp included an artillery machine gun which had just gone off. Mother Éireann pointed upward to employ what Pauline Codd calls the pull factors, such as patriotism or compassion for poor little Belgium. Women persuaded men to enlist. Mothers, wives and daughters endorsed the departure of men to defend their honour. Sinn Fein appealed to women within their own movement and skillfully appropriated the historic and new methods of consumer and Great War propaganda and seized upon the new franchise qualifications. And an example is in a pamphlet titled An Appeal to the Women of Ireland, where many of the Great War themes that exemplify the role of women became those of Irish freedom in election campaigns. Ireland, it was claimed, had been personified as female because in the woman the ancient Gael saw the great glory of his race. A chronicle of the valiant champions of the dispossessed race, such as Patrick Sarsfield, Wolfe Tone, Robert Emmet, John Mitchell, Charles Stewart Parnell and Pádraig Pearse, the grateful voices of the dead, now cried out to the women of Ireland to stand by their tortured sister, Rosaleen. It was pointed out that women could save Ireland if they voted in similar fashion to Mrs. Pearse, in order that the ancient Gael could be realised, or the ancient ideal could be realised. The objective of using history and Gaelic culture was to entice women to vote with Sinn Fein. If the lure of the ancient did not satisfy, then the politics of fear was applied, as the physical safety of the race depends upon our immediate freedom. The promise of a dynamic future in politics in the line, the women folk of the Gael shall have a high place in the councils of a freed Gaelic nation, was the final attempt to attract women to the Sinn Fein side. However, in constituencies where women candidates ran for election, much of the campaigning was conducted for women by women, with the males propping up male candidates. Hannah Sheehy Skeffington described Markievich's constituency as the worst managed constituency in Dublin. And the activist Meg Connery remarked that the one woman they have thrown as a sop to the women of the country has her interests neglected. As Margaret Ward points out, although supported by a few prominent men and women, Winifred Carney was marginalised by the press and isolated among the Ulster Unionist Party and Irish Parliamentary Party supporters and undermined by poor organisation in the local party. Winning only 395 votes, she lost her deposit, declaring with some bitterness, "I had neither personation agents, committee rooms, canvassers or vehicles. And as these are the chief agents in an election, it was amazing to me to find that 395 people went to the ballot box on their own initiative without any persuasion. The organisation in Belfast could have been much, much better." Laffan, in his work The Resurrection of Ireland, points out rightly that there appeared to be a disconnect between the Sinn Féin leaders and the rank and file on the role of women members, with the latter being more conservative in this respect. Unionists also emulated Great War themes and, like Sinn Féin, created propaganda directly aimed at women. Carson's obdurate stance on the issue of women's suffrage had influenced James Craig, as he was not prepared to challenge the main goal of Unionists, which was the defeat of Home Rule. However, by 1912, with at least 100,000 members in the Ulster Women's Unionist Council, the female voice stirred, particularly during the Home Rule crisis. In 1918, Unionists in all constituencies across Ireland were prodded from within to take steps to provide for close cooperation of men and women in the Unionist organisations. Sobering encouragement went out to women themselves to endeavour to interest other women to see that their votes are registered in the constituency in which they live. Failure to cast a vote was warned against because a very great responsibility will soon be placed upon us in the exercising of our vote. To increase anxiety and alarm, a handbill, the text of which I put up there, which is difficult to read, so I'll give you a line or two from it, cautioned Unionist women to be wary of the Irish Party and Sinn Féin candidates who were posing as Unionists, because they are prepared to promise anything to catch our vote and to support many schemes that are quite impracticable of fulfilment. Diane Urquhart maintains that a communication network had been formed among Unionist women during wartime fundraising initiatives, and that this had important implications in the strengthening of Unionist solidarity. Nancy Kingham points out that female Orange Lodges became a useful networking arena. Meetings to petition Unionist women collectively were enabled by the formation of these organisations, and it was advised that when addressing female Unionist meetings that they should be addressed by the candidate and women speakers whenever possible. Unionists, like Sinn Féin, encouraged women to become active politically as canvassers, lobbyists and supervisors of electoral registers. Propaganda was specifically targeted at women, outlining their role and responsibilities not only as wives and mothers, but also in relation to church, home, country and empire. Unionist candidates in Dublin, Henry Hanna and Maurice Dockrell, placed small advertisements in the Irish Independent that addressed ladies and gentlemen. Labour became attentive not only to the voting potential of women, but also to the assistance that could be given by the great hosts of the new voters who have come upon the new register. They acknowledged that our sisters became enfranchised only as the result of many generations of great efforts, as noble sacrifices, as gallant battles as any in the history of these people. Linking with past freedom crusades, William O'Brien endeavoured to elevate the revolutionary struggle to attain votes for women with that of the 1916 Rising. He also called for room to be made for women voters in our political as well as in our industrial work and in the new constitution of the Congress and Party. The militant strategies of some of the suffrage movements that had compelled the extension to our women comrades the right to vote mirrored that of the fighting elements of Labour he maintained, and it was claimed that the lesson would not be lost. P.T. Daly, in a letter to the Trades Councils, was more practical, as he wanted to know how women voters can be organised and associated with our work as a Labour Party. By targeting propaganda at women voters, Unionists and Sinn Fein gained advantage on polling day. The female vote contributed to their success and would do for Labour in the 1920 local elections, and led to Irish Party losses in the general and local elections. Unlike Unionists and Sinn Fein, the Irish Party had neglected to create targeted propaganda to capture the female vote, aside from Joseph Devlin, who made specific mention of issues that affected women in this era. He had attempted to make amends by addressing both the ladies and gentlemen of the Falls Division of Belfast, and by emphasising his record of reform, particularly in the old age pension, which was created to support Irish men and Irish women in frugal comfort in their own homes. He also appealed for equality of pay, advocated for the distribution of wealth among the masses of its citizens, and he stated, "The only real wealth of any city or country is in the health, happiness, contentment and well-being of its working class." Outstanding issues such as housing, he argued, could be settled for themselves quickly and satisfactorily if Irish men and Irish women had home rule. Whether Devlin's policies appealed or whether women voters were swayed because of inclusivity is hard to tell, but he was one of 6 Irish Party MPs in Ireland to hold a seat in 1918. Irish Party propaganda and policy during the Home Rule era, and particularly in the general election campaign, left some women feeling deserted and betrayed. The emphasis to win Home Rule versus siding with women protesting for the vote had forced a decision. The Irish Party decided to vote against female suffrage because they believed it would bring the Liberal government down, with the Conservative and Unionist government taking power, and it was, perhaps rightly, believed that they would never grant Home Rule to Ireland. Morning. The image from the Irish Citizen newspaper and long memories meant that these decisions were not forgotten in 1918. The Irish Women's Franchise League at their meeting accused Mr Dillon's party of being, from the very beginning, hostile to their league. They reminded that Dillon had previously stated he hoped they, women, would never get the vote as it would mean the disturbing of Western civilization. But it is important to remember that although John Dillon and John Redmond did not support votes for women, William Redmond did, but his voice was silenced because he was killed in the Great War. So not all Irish Party MPs were against women's votes. Most parties called on women and the youth of Ireland to carry out the door-to-door canvass. Canvassing was an essential component for checking the register of electors, for face-to-face contact by a candidate or a candidate's representative, and to ensure that a vote could be relied upon to attend the poll. The personal canvass offered opportunity to suggest a viable alternative to fixed opinions, particularly in the case of Sinn Fein, which was fielding many unknown candidates. Organisations and movements that supported a specific political philosophy supplied visible assistance to parties in election campaigns. Women's movements were affiliated to volunteer organisations and congruently to political parties, and they also assisted in election campaigns. They were often ancillary forces to the main organisations. For example, a distinct female organisation reinforced the Orange Order, known as the Association of Loyal Orange Women of Ireland, and Cumann na mBan buttressed the Irish Volunteers. These women proved crucial in mobilising the female vote, which resulted in victory for Unionists and Sinn Fein in the 1918 general election. Vigorous canvassing formed a core duty for young women and young men. As John McCoy stated in his Bureau of Military History witness statement, young girls were mobilised and worked on the register and on the canvass of the voters enthusiastically. Unionist women were also encouraged to canvass for their candidates and were reminded that it was the duty of every working woman at the present time to speak out her views with no uncertain voice. The novelty of being able to cast a vote and participate at the political level sparked enthusiasm among women. Propaganda to encourage women to exercise their franchise, particularly by Unionists and Sinn Fein, resulted in high turnout and votes cast for these parties. Reporting about women on election day, which was the 14th of December 1918, 100 years ago yesterday, the Irish Citizen remarked that babies were washed and husbands fed on election day, just as they are on washing day or at spring cleaning. The police court returns showed no increase in domestic strife, such as was predicted by the duties if a wife voted against her husband's favourite. Babies were wheeled along to the booths and policemen looked after them while mothers voted. Sometimes even fathers condescended to the task. Evidence of the high turnout by women was in the newspaper reports that consistently commented on their predominance at the polls. For instance, the Irish Times stated that from all quarters women voted in large numbers and early in the day. And in Belfast, women also voted in larger numbers than was generally anticipated. This did not bode well for the Irish Party. Yet a number of other factors, aside from women's votes, did influence the election results. A fortnight elapsed between polling and the declaration of results, which were announced on the 28th of December and most were published in the newspapers on the 30th of December. Absent and abstaining voters and the large number of uncontested seats makes it challenging to gain voter rationale, including women's rationale. Effective Sinn Féin electoral propaganda had swayed many voters in 25 constituencies and had ousted potential challengers from the field. Dillon blamed stupid blunders on the part of our men for 2 of these, and the hopeless lack of organisation in the country, and sheer cowardice, which was an obvious reference to the large number of retiring Irish Party MPs. In total, there were 103 constituencies with 105 seats, and the total electorate in contested constituencies in 1918 was 1,462,895. The total valid votes of December 1918 gave Sinn Féin an overall majority in Ireland's 3 southern provinces, and enabled the claim that the results of the national plebiscite, held under British law and British supervision, indicated the will of the Irish people as to the government under which they live. But if Ulster's results are added, given that this was an all-Ireland election, then the claim of a homogenous desire for self-determination does not hold up. Unionists in Ulster followed instructions to vote solidly for their own candidates to maintain the Union and establish a policy of material progress in 1918. Although this is a generalisation, the results portray the success of Unionist candidates and there is no denying their determination. Furthermore, if the total votes for Irish Party candidates, the low turnout and the absent votes are calculated and the method of the first-past-the-post voting system are taken into consideration, Sinn Féin's landslide victory is questionable. The proportion of votes attained in an All-Ireland context gave Sinn Féin only 46.9% of the total vote, Unionist 28.5% and the Irish Party 21.7%. Of course, this does not take into account the uncontested seats, and as those figures were already mentioned. The Great War, Éireann registers, the influenza pandemic, deceased voters and emigration may have caused some of the absenteeism in 1918, but cannot account for figures running into the thousands. One of the most well-known Sinn Féin victors of the 1918 general election was Constance Markievicz, candidate for the Dublin St Patrick's division, who did gain 66% of the vote. She attained 4,083 more votes than her nearest rival, who was the nationalist William Field. The other candidate, Wynn, who contested in the highly unionist constituency of Belfast Victoria, received only 4%, although Sinn Féin did not do well in any of the northern counties that later went on to become Northern Ireland. Hannah Sheehy Skeffington had declined the nomination to run for Sinn Féin, as had already mentioned Helena Maloney for Labour. Women protested that they were offered weak constituencies, and others maintained that they were disregarded in favour of male candidates. Anna Haslam believed that women were withheld by the heavy expense involved in contesting elections. Was the female vote powerful in 1918? While there were other factors that affected electoral outcomes in 1918, which I've already mentioned, there is proof that the parties that appeal directly to women in propaganda campaigns secured their votes. Although according to the Irish Citizen in December 1918, women like men have fallen into party ranks, though on the whole they are proving themselves so far less slaves to party than are men. Sinn Féin deposed the Irish Party in the 1918 general election in the 3 southern provinces of Ireland because they had converted the voting majority into believing in their abstentionist policy and speculative appeal to the Paris Peace Conference. However, there were some very tight contests between Sinn Féin and the Irish Party. In Louth, for example, John O'Kelly only marginally defeated the Irish Party's Richard Hazelton, and in Wexford South, Sinn Féin's James Ryan narrowly won over Peter French. Wicklow East could have been another tight contest had the Irish Party not split their vote with 2 candidates in the field. Therefore, despite the Irish Party's anti-suffrage stance, some women over 30 did cast in favour of the Irish Party candidate in 1918. In conclusion, Unionists had perpetrated hard resistance to the Third Home Rule Bill in 1918. The same messages were reassigned to electoral campaigns and became reinvigorated and energised by Great War rhetoric. Sinn Fein and Ulster Unionists succeeded in convincing the electorate to support their brand of politics throughout these election campaigns, proving that their propaganda methods and content held all the right ingredients to deliver success. Welcoming the demise of the parliamentary party, the Irish citizen delightedly saw an element of ironic justice in the fact that women, whose claims it so long opposed with such unbending hostility, should have played so large a part in its final annihilation. The propaganda and electioneering campaigns in 1918 altered the course of Irish politics, and the electoral outcomes shaped the formation of the Irish party system and influenced the political landscape for decades. However, the suffrage movement and the enfranchisement of women in 1918 and the advent of universal suffrage in the Irish Free State did not give, and I'll go back to an earlier quote, the women folk of the Gael a high place in the councils of a freed Gaelic nation. To coin a Fianna Fáil, 2002 election slogan, a lot done, more to do. And in the context of fairness and equality, I'll quote a Fianna Gael 2016 election campaign, let's keep the recovery going of women in politics. Thank you very much.
Elaine, thank you very much for that very interesting and innovative paper. I think we've had the benefit this morning of very considerable original research, and I thank Elaine for that.